Ladder. That was the sound that followed Maren Holloway through the lobby of Ashford and Lowe Financial every single morning. Not the click of heels on marble, not the elevator chime, the laughter. Maren was 63 years old, and she pushed a cart that squeaked on its left front wheel no matter how many times maintenance sprayed it with WD-40. She wore a navy uniform with her name stitched in yellow thread above the left breast pocket. She moved slowly because her left hip had been replaced 14 months ago, and the cold air in the building made it ache before 9 in the morning. The people who laughed at her didn't know any of that. They didn't ask. The first time it happened, a young associate named Preston Caldwell had done a full impression of her shuffle for his group of friends near the coffee station. He'd hunched his back, dragged one foot, and said in a high croak, "Anybody need their trash taken?" They had nearly spilled their drinks laughing. Maren had kept her head down and emptied the bin under the nearest desk. She didn't say a word. That was 4 months before any of them understood what they had actually done. Ashford and Lowe occupied floors 12 to 17 of the Granville Tower in downtown Chicago. It managed investment portfolios worth a combined $4.7 billion. The lobby on floor 12, the main reception floor, was all glass and pale stone. There were 2 waiting areas with low sofas, the color of slate. The windows faced north and east, so on clear mornings the lake looked like hammered tin. Maren Holloway had cleaned that lobby every day for the past 3 months. She arrived at 6:15 before almost anyone else, and she was usually still there when the 9 o'clock rush came through the glass doors. She was methodical. She started at the elevator bank, worked outward in wide arcs, got into the corners where the molding met the floor. She did not cut corners. She had never cut a corner in her life. Preston Caldwell had coined the nickname. He called her Glacier, as in, she moved like one. He said it behind his hand to whoever was standing nearest when Maren came through with the cart. People laughed because Preston laughed, and because Preston was 27 and had gone to Northwestern on a lacrosse scholarship and had the kind of easy confidence that made other people feel they needed his approval to exhale. There was also Tiffany Morse, a junior analyst who had once watched Maren carefully wipe down a glass panel for 3 full minutes and then said, loudly enough to be heard across the room, "At this rate, she'll finish the building sometime in 2040. There was laughter. There was always laughter. And there was Keaton Bryce, mid-level compliance officer, who had once deliberately knocked over a full cup of coffee near where Maren was working, watched it spread across 2 feet of pale marble and said, "Oops, yours now, I think." He had walked away without looking back. Maren had looked at the puddle for a moment. Then she had pulled a fresh cloth from the bottom shelf of her cart and cleaned it up. Her face showed nothing. That was a skill she had developed over a very long time. But there were things the lobby cameras had seen that nobody in the building had thought to review. Not yet. 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning in late October, a woman named Priscilla Andover had arrived to the Granville Tower in a town car and taken the elevator directly to the 17th floor, the executive suite. The receptionist had greeted her warmly and offered coffee. Priscilla had declined. She had spent 40 minutes in a conference room with the acting co-directors of Ashford and Lowe. Then she had taken the elevator back down to 12 and walked slowly, with a slight limp, through the main lobby. She had looked at the carpet seams, the light fixtures, the distance between the service corridor and the front desk. She had stood near the elevator bank for a long time, looking at nothing in particular, while the morning crowd moved around her. Then she had walked out, gotten back into the town car, and told the driver to take her to the Marriott on Michigan Avenue. 2 weeks later, she had come back. This time, she had gone to the facilities office on sub-level 2. She had spoken with the building supervisor, a quiet man named Earl who had worked at Granville Tower for 22 years. She had shown him a document with a seal on it. Earl had nodded several times. He had given her a uniform and a cart with a squeaky left wheel. "You sure about this?" he had asked. "I've done it before," she had said. "You'd be surprised what people show you when they think you're invisible." Priscilla Andover was not Maren Holloway. That is to say, Her name badge said Marin Holloway, and she had signed for the badge on the facilities log as Marin Holloway. But the woman inside that Navy uniform was Priscilla Andover, who was 63 years old and who had founded Ashford and Lowe Financial 21 years ago in a two-room office in Wicker Park with $11,000 and a business plan she'd written by hand in a spiral notebook. She was the majority shareholder. She held controlling interest. Every paycheck signed in that building, from the co-directors down to Preston Caldwell and his lacrosse scholarship confidence, carried her signature authority. She had stepped back from day-to-day operations 4 years ago, when the firm had grown past what one person could reasonably hold in her head. She'd appointed co-directors and kept her position as chair. She stayed mostly out of sight. That was intentional. Over the years, she'd found that the way an organization behaved when leadership wasn't watching told you more about its health than any quarterly report. So she watched. She just watched from a different angle than anyone expected. This was not the first time she'd done it. She'd worked as a mail courier in her own building in 2019 for 6 weeks. She'd found 3 separate instances of expense fraud and one egregious case of a senior partner taking credit for work done entirely by his assistant. All 3 issues had been resolved. The senior partner was no longer with the firm. This time, something had prompted her to come back. She'd gotten a message, anonymous, sent through a third-party relay that described a pattern of behavior on floor 12 that had reportedly gone on long enough to become normal. The message was 4 sentences long. The last sentence read, "Nobody says anything because nobody thinks anyone is watching." Priscilla Andover had thought about that sentence for 2 days. Then she had called Earl. By the 3rd week, she had a full picture. Not because anyone was overtly monstrous. That was the thing that was almost harder to process than open cruelty would have been. The behavior at Ashford and Lowe Floor 12 was the slow, ambient kind. The kind that accumulated in layers so thin that each individual layer seemed dismissible. Preston's nickname for her. Tiffany's commentary at just the right volume. Keaton's coffee. The way 3 different associates had handed her trash without looking at her, the bag dangling from 2 fingers as though they were leaving it for a dog. The way nobody held the door when they could see her coming with the cart. The way, on a Thursday morning in November, a group of 6 people had gathered near the elevator and someone had started timing how long it took her to cross the lobby, out loud, with a countdown. When she finally reached the far end, they had clapped slowly, the way you clap for a child who has just finished something embarrassing. Priscilla had set down her mop, turned, and looked directly at them. They had looked back at her the way people look at furniture, as if she had no interior, as if there was nothing behind her eyes that could process what they were doing and form a judgment about it. She had turned back to her mop. She had finished the section she was working on. She had moved on to the next. But she had remembered every face. There was one exception. Her name was Delia Okafor, and she was a 26-year-old research associate who had been at the firm for 7 months. She was slight and had close-cropped hair and wore the same 2 blazers on rotation, one gray, one dark green, because she was still paying down student loans and didn't pretend otherwise. On Delia's 3rd day passing Marin in the lobby, she had stopped. "Can I help you move that?" she'd said, nodding at the cart. Marin had looked at her. "I've got it." "Okay," Delia had said. That corner wheel sounds rough." "It does," Marin had agreed. Delia had smiled and gone to the elevator. That was all. But the next Monday, she had come in with a small paper bag from the diner on Wabash and set it on the edge of Marin's cart without making a production of it. "I got an extra," she'd said, which was almost certainly not true, and walked on. After that, it became a quiet routine, not every day, but often enough. Sometimes Delia brought coffee, sometimes she just stopped and said good morning like she meant it. Not as performance, not to be seen doing it, but because that was apparently simply how Delia Okafor moved through the world. Priscilla noted it. She noted everything. The morning it all came undone was the 2nd Friday in January. The payroll system at Ashford and Lowe generated physical signature pages for distribution records once a quarter. It was an old process that had survived multiple software upgrades because the firm's original operating agreement required wet signatures on disbursement records, a clause Priscilla had written herself in year one and never removed. Each quarter, a document was generated that listed every employee's compensation and bore the chair's signature at the bottom. Most employees had never seen the actual document. They knew a signature existed somewhere. They had no particular reason to think about whose it was. On the second Friday in January, Priscilla came in at 6:15 as usual. She cleaned the lobby, she refilled the soap dispensers in the second-floor restrooms, she emptied the recycling near the print station on floor 12. At 8:47, she pushed her cart into the service corridor and left it there. She took off the navy jacket and folded it over the cart handle. She took the elevator to 17. At 9:15, the co-directors called an all-staff meeting. Floor 12 only, mandatory 15 minutes, conference room B. 31 people filed in. Someone had brought donuts. The energy in the room was mildly irritated in the way of people who have been pulled from their desks on a Friday morning without explanation. Priscilla walked in at 9:19. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and her hair was down instead of pulled back under a cap. She set a folder on the table at the head of the room. She did not say, "Good morning." She let the silence do its work. Preston Caldwell was the first to place her. She saw it happen, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the moment of confusion, and then the confusion, curdling into something that sat very badly on his face. Tiffany Morse had gone the color of old paper. Keaton Bryce was looking at the folder on the table as though it might contain evidence of a crime, which, in a sense, it did. "My name is Priscilla Andover," she said. "I'm the founder and chair of this firm. Some of you may have seen me in the lobby over the past several months. I was pushing a cart." Nobody breathed. "I want to be precise about what I observed, because I think precision matters more than drama." She opened the folder. "I observed a pattern of behavior directed at a member of the facility staff, me as it happened, though I want to be very clear that the behavior would have been equally unacceptable directed at anyone else. That included verbal mockery, deliberate creation of messes for the purpose of watching them cleaned up, and sustained, organized ridicule. I observed these behaviors on 19 separate occasions over 11 weeks. I have dates, times, and in several cases I have them on the building's internal camera system, which I reviewed with facilities management and your IT director last Tuesday." She closed the folder. "I also observed one person who behaved differently throughout that entire period." She looked at Delia, who was sitting near the back of the room, very still, with an expression Priscilla could not entirely read. Dignity, maybe. The specific kind that comes from not having anything to be ashamed of. "I want to come back to that," Priscilla said. "What happened next happened quickly, and then slowly, and then with the particular weight of things that can't be undone." Preston Caldwell was terminated that morning. His keycard was deactivated before he reached his desk. He had 7 minutes to collect personal items, which was 6 more than Priscilla had felt was strictly necessary. But she was not a cruel person, and she was not trying to make a spectacle. She was correcting a problem. Tiffany Morse was placed on a 60-day performance review and informed that any further incidents would result in immediate termination. She did not argue. She had the look of someone who had just understood, all at once, every choice that had led her to a particular room. Keaton Bryce received a formal written warning and was transferred to the firm's secondary office in Indianapolis. He had not asked to be transferred. He did not decline. 3 other associates received written warnings. They were people who had laughed, who had participated in the countdown, who had treated the whole thing as a form of entertainment that belonged to them by right of being young and employed, and, they had apparently imagined, exempt from consequence. They were not exempt. Priscilla signed the relevant documents in conference room B with a pen she'd carried in her pocket for 23 years, since the day she'd signed the original incorporation papers in that 2-room office in Wicker Park. She always used the same pen for things that mattered. After the others had been dismissed, she asked Delia Okafor to stay. Delia sat in the chair across the table and folded her hands and waited. She was not performing composure. She simply was composed, in the way of someone who has learned to be still, because stillness is protective and has never entirely unlearned it. "You didn't know," Priscilla said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Delia said. "I had no idea." She paused. She seemed tired, and nobody was being particularly nice." Another pause. "That's not complicated." "No," Priscilla agreed. "It isn't." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was not a termination notice, or a warning or a transfer order. It was an offer. Senior Research Associate, effective the 1st of February. A significant salary increase. A direct reporting line to the Director of Strategy on 15. Delia looked at it for a long moment. She looked up. "Is this because of the coffee?" she said. Priscilla almost smiled. "It's because of 7 months of work that I reviewed with your supervisor this week." The coffee was confirmatory evidence. She leaned back slightly. The work was the reason. Delia was quiet for another moment. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You just have to decide." There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being unseen for a long time, not the tiredness of hard work. Priscilla Andover had been tired from hard work for most of her adult life and had found that kind of tiredness almost companionable, the way sore muscles after a good effort are almost satisfying. No, this was a different kind. The tiredness that comes from standing in a room full of people who look through you, from performing invisibility so completely that you begin in small ways to doubt your own outline. She had chosen it, which made it easier in some ways and harder in others. She could walk away from it whenever she decided to. The people who actually worked those jobs, who actually pushed those carts and cleaned those lobbies and had their worth evaluated in seconds by strangers who didn't know them and didn't wanna, they could not walk away. That was the point she had been trying to understand more deeply each time she did this. Not to test other people exactly, to remind herself of something she suspected was easy to forget when you spent most of your time on the 17th floor. She took the elevator down to sub-level 2 on her way out. She found Earl in the facilities office, filling out a maintenance log at his desk. "Finished," he said. "Finished," she said. She set the badge on his desk. He picked it up and looked at it. Then he looked at her. "Did it help?" he asked. He meant it genuinely. Earl was a man who asked things genuinely, which was rarer than it should have been. She thought about it, about the lobby, and the cart, and the cold air, and Preston Caldwell's impression of her shuffle, about Delia with a paper bag from the diner on Wabash, about what people showed you when they thought you were invisible, and what that showing revealed. Not just about them, but about what the building had allowed to become normal. "It helped me understand what needed to be fixed," she said, "and what was already working." She thanked him and walked out through the service exit into the January cold, where the lake wind came off the water hard enough to make your eyes water. She pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the parking structure. She had 3 meetings that afternoon and a call with the firm's legal counsel at 4. On Monday, she would begin the process of reviewing the firm's workplace conduct policies, which she suspected had not been meaningfully updated in at least 5 years. There was a lot of work left. There always was. But walking out of the Granville Tower on that Friday morning in January, with the wind off the lake and the sky the flat white of midwinter, Priscilla Andover felt something she recognized from the very beginning of things. From that 2-room office and the spiral notebook and the $11,000 and all the years of people not quite looking at her directly because they hadn't yet decided what she was worth. She felt clear. And she thought, as she had thought many times before, people will show you exactly who they are if you give them enough time and enough reason to believe no one important is watching. The tragedy isn't that they show you. The tragedy isn't that they show you. The tragedy is how surprised they are when you were watching all along. I keep thinking about that cart, the one with the squeaky left wheel that nobody ever fixed. Not because they couldn't, but because nobody who passed it every morning thought it was worth their attention. That's where it starts, I think. Not with the big cruelties, with the small decisions about what's worth noticing. Priscilla Andover noticed everything. She noticed the coffee Keaton left on the floor. She noticed Preston's impression. She noticed the countdown, the slow clap, the 31 people who thought they were in a room where nothing permanent could happen to them. And she noticed Aaliyah, who stopped, who asked if she could help, who brought a paper bag from the diner on Wabash on a Monday morning and didn't make a performance of it. What strikes me most isn't the ending. It's the middle. The long weeks of Priscilla pushing that cart through a lobby full of people who had decided, without ever saying it out loud, that she didn't merit basic consideration. That took something most people don't talk about. Not just patience, but a specific kind of inner steadiness. The ability to absorb what was being done without letting it rewrite what she knew to be true about herself. She had built something real. She knew it. The lobby full of people who didn't know it didn't change the fact. That's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't have to. And then there's Delia, 26 years old, paying down student loans, rotating 2 blazers because money is real, and pretending otherwise is a luxury she didn't have. She didn't stop to help because she knew who Priscilla was. She stopped because someone seemed tired and nobody was being particularly nice, and she thought, that's not complicated. That sentence is one of the most honest things in this whole story to me. Goodness, when it's real, doesn't require calculation. It doesn't need a reason beyond the obvious one. The thing about what Preston and Keaton and Tiffany did is that none of them thought they were making a significant choice. That's the part that should sit with us. They thought they were just existing in a moment that didn't count. A break room bit, a 30-second bit of entertainment on the way to the elevator. They never considered that every moment counts to someone, and that the person it counts to might one day be sitting at the head of a conference room table holding a folder with your name in it. That's not justice as punishment. That's just cause-meeting effect, the way it eventually does. Not always. Not on anyone's preferred timeline, but often enough that the people who act as if they're unobserved are taking a risk they don't understand. What I take from Priscilla's story is this: character is what you build in the years before anyone is watching. Judgment, real judgment, the kind that lets you see situations clearly and respond to them with precision rather than reaction, that gets built in the quiet. And the willingness to keep going when the work is invisible and the recognition is zero, that's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. The lobby didn't change who she was. It only revealed who everyone else was. And Delia, who brought the coffee and didn't explain why, walked out of that building as a senior research associate, not because she was performing decency, because she was practicing it, on an ordinary Monday, when she had no reason to believe it would ever amount to anything more than a small good act on a forgettable morning. That's the only kind that's actually worth anything.